I remember when I was asked to do my first like women's panel, and I just took it so seriously. I was like, because I went back to my Women on Wall Street thought. I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to be impactful. And then I remember I talked to my mom before I went and did it. And my mom was like, well, just be yourself, and I was like, you're right. She's right. And it's like, because like you just got to be yourself, because if you're not, you're going to just show up wrong.
This is Converge, a podcast from Convera. Come with us as we shape the future of finance.
Welcome back to Converge. It is day 2 at Money 2020, and I have 2 incredible female leaders and influencers with me today to talk about women in fintech and the complexities and inspiration within that subject. So without further ado, welcome to Nicole Casperson, who we've had on the show before. She's the founder of Fintech is Femme, and Julie Armstrong, who is the VP and General Manager of Global Verticalized Industries and Partnerships at Convera. That's a long title, but
you do a lot. I do a lot.
It rolls right off the tongue, right?
Yeah.
But anyways, we'll dive right in because I know you guys have a lot to say on this subject, and this is a really wonderful moment to be having this type of conversation. Nicole, just because you're a prolific publisher on social media, there's a lot I could grab onto to start the conversation. So let's talk about something you recently wrote on LinkedIn that grabbed my attention. Was that you said that you cover fintech in particular because of the incredible women who are building in it. Mm-hmm. And you've been inspired by female leaders who are scrappier, more flexible, innovative, and resilient, despite receiving less funding and media attention, and that they are building companies that unlock the economy for the most underserved. I agree. Exactly. It's amazing. Tell us about how you went from journalism to fintech to the creation of Fintech is Femme, just to set the stage, and why it's so important for you to celebrate women in this industry in the ways that you do now.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for bringing that up. Basically, my background is in journalism. So I've been a reporter and editor for a number of different trade publications and for nearly a decade. And what that opportunity and that experience gave me was an inside look into what's happening behind the scenes in newsrooms. Business publications are really important to the narrative of what's going on in the most powerful business sectors on a planet, like fintech, right? We sit at the intersection of finance and technology. Like, what's more powerful than that?
Not much.
Yeah, exactly. So what I discovered is that, one, I was typically the only woman in the room, even on the media side. And 2, I kind of directly saw why the narratives around women, money, and business were so bad, like just were not representative of what actually is happening in the space. We're fed a lot of negative headlines. There is the 2%, and these things of funding, right? These things are very real. But when they're the only thing that we're fed all the time, it just imprints into our heads that, oh, we don't belong here. Oh, it's difficult to be here in this space. Oh, I have so many DMs from women that are like, I want to be in fintech, but I don't know how. And it's because we've never put stories of other women out there to give them a blueprint to follow. And so that's what I've dedicated Fintech is Femme to, is amplifying the stories of women that are building in fintech. Don't tell me there's a pipeline problem. I've got a whole 90,000 page book of stories of women in fintech to show you how to be a part of this industry, how to build the different strategies that it takes, the different places in the economy where we need to see more improvement. But yeah, it's been incredibly inspiring over the last few years. In 2021, I left my traditional reporting job and launched my own newsletter. Got a bunch of subscribers and just saw the market opportunity to actually tell the stories of incredible women in fintech with the mission to mint more female founders, investors, innovators in the space.
Oh, that's so great. And Julie, you similarly have been an advocate for women in finance and fintech for many years, collaborated on a book, you said, around the topic, and launched women's networks, I think you said, at previous companies. So tell us what drives you in your own personal journey to advocate for women in a similar way.
Great. Well, first off, let me just say what a pleasure it is to meet Nicole. So glad we're doing this together. Genuinely, this is the first I've heard of your newsletter, but I'm going to be a subscriber. So I'm thrilled to hear about this and to do this with you. Thank you, Alex, for the time.
Of course.
Oh, my journey. Well, it's it's really started. First off, I think every journey starts personally, right? I was raised by a single mom. My dad definitely still in the picture. Love my dad, but I grew up with a single mom and my grandma in the house, and always felt very strongly supported by my parents, but by my grandmas. And I don't know, just I really grew up with a layer of that support, giving me confidence to kind of just feel like I could show up um, and do whatever I wanted to do. And my parents just really always kind of pushed me into doing that. And so, how did that translate into my career? I came in to international finance 20 plus years ago. I heard your emphasis on many years. It's true. 20 plus years I've been in Fintech. I literally built my entire career around commercialization and technology. And that really started a long time ago. My mom graduated high school, took me on a trip to Europe. And, we're sitting in Amsterdam right now, which is absolutely incredible. But, out of high school, when I grew up in rural Kentucky, going to London and Spain and France was absolutely unthinkable. And so it really sparked something in me where I was like, I'm going to do this. My mom's like, what does this mean? I was like, I want to work with international people. I want to be in international commerce. I'm going to figure out a way to do it. And it took me a long time to kind of figure out, well, how do I get in? So to your point, I mean, I grew up, went to University of Kentucky, got my international economics degree, but still, what do I do with that? I traveled for a long time. I traveled for about 8 years, moving different states, countries, language programs, et cetera. And then I kind of stumbled into a small software company, private company, and thought, here I go. I'm gonna interview, right? I had no experience in the software. I had no experience in the financial markets, but I had lived in Europe, and they were hiring for a European account manager. And I thought, well, I'll try, and it's a relationship-based job. And when I showed up for the interview, I thought I was an imposter. I'm never going to get this job, and I got the job on the spot. And that really did, at that point, it was an inflection point of like, okay, I've got this. And then I sat there and thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? I don't know anything about execution software and equities and options. And, much more to say in some of the other questions that we're going to get through today. But that first year was a pretty grueling year for me, I'll say. Like, it was a little happy story that I just told you, right? But I was living at the time in Chicago and did not have a network in the financial industry whatsoever. I'm going to date myself and tell you that, LinkedIn was not an option. There was no network ability, right, in that regard. The network ability was through conferences, travel, customer engagements, and things, which I leaned into. But I showed up there and was like, who do I go to? There was no, there was actually a woman in charge, right? But not in my arena, right? And I didn't have that immediate role model. I didn't have that immediate camaraderie on the desk, right? And I'll tell you, the first experience that I had was I went and looked to my left to the guy I was working with, and I said, hey, any chance you could help me here and help me demonstrate, options? And I will never forget this moment. He looked at me and he says, I don't think so, honey. You're on your own.
What?
Yes. And I thought,
well, at least you asked.
Challenge accepted. And I thought, okay.
Yeah.
And so I thought, okay, I'm on my own. And I will say that any dialogue I'm going to have on this subject, as a person, you have to show up and be willing to do the work, man or woman, right? But that moment really defined me, where I was like, got it. Okay, start reading. I will start practicing, here I go. And, 20 plus years later, I would consider myself an expert in financial technology and equities, options, futures, FX, you name it. And so I know that was a pretty long introduction, but that's how I first got my start.
But to your point, before the next question though, I really admire a couple of things. One, a lot of the women profiled in my book also come from single mom households, which I think is like a very interesting element. That you're just like inspired by the women before you, especially the women in your household leading the way. And then the other point is, I am so inspired also, and why I do what I do is women like yourself who've been in the space that long, who I've heard the stories of like, oh, that moment, right, where you asked for help and someone said no. You could have been like, okay, maybe this isn't a place for me. And instead you were like, I'll show you.
Not in my DNA.
No, I know. I mean, I'm the same way, right?
Yeah.
Like starting as a journalist in the finance and tech space, I didn't know anything. I was fresh out of grad school, just landed a job covering the mortgage industry. I was like thrown to the wolves, you know, my editors were just like, start reading bank statements of X, Y, and Z bank and like look at their mortgage originations and start connecting dots. And I'm like, great, I don't know anything about this at all. But that's when, you know, Google becomes your friend, or you just like, I just became obsessed with learning about this thing so that, you know, I could have my publisher not say his horrible comments to me or whatever. I mean, definitely doesn't justify any of that, but I do think there's like a piece of yourself that kind of has to be very willing to be like, I'll show you.
And you got to be willing to do the work, because I realized that I showed up on the doorstep with some experience traveling internationally. Okay, fine. And I had an international degree, you know, economic degree, but it didn't mean I showed up with all the things that they were going to need from me to do the job, which I actually think is another thing that women tend to do. They tend to say, well, I don't check all the boxes.
Right.
And so then they don't show up for the interview. They don't show up to raise their hand for the opportunity. And I have to say that, you know, you have to, if you tick 7 of the 10, go for it, right? Because the other 3, you're going to go figure out. Either you got the work ethic to go figure it out, or the smarts to go figure it out, or a combination of both. You've got to do it, right? And I, you know, and I'll give, yes, it was a single mom household, but I'll give my dad a lot of credit for my work ethic and, you know, the confidence that, you know, I show up with, because I grew up, this is going to make the podcast listeners laugh, but I grew up bowling with my father.
Bowling?
Yes. Cause my
That's
parents
cute.
were divorced, and that's how my
Bonded.
dad and I connected. We
Yeah.
rode horses with him, played golf, because he told me I couldn't go to business without playing golf. And,
Solid move.
and
Dad.
then, right. And he was right. And to a degree. And then I went bowling, and I was the only woman only girl on the team, as you can imagine. And that, I think, actually started something for me, because I was the tom girl. I was the only girl that was like, well, no, I'm going to go. I want to do this. You know, I want to go over here. I don't care if it's just guys, you know, bowling or whatever. And, but thank my dad for giving me the backbone too, and the strength
I
there.
love that.
So, yeah.
I'm the same way. So funny. My dad was like, and we're gonna get to your questions, I swear.
No. Take your time.
Trust us, Alex.
Just take your time.
Yeah.
Take your time.
But my dad did this thing where he would make me go like and talk to strangers and ask them questions. So, you know, he'd be like, hey, Nicole, like I want to order pizza for the family for dinner tonight. Mom doesn't want to cook. Can you call Domino's, whatever, and order us a pizza? And, you know, like, have you ever met like a kid? They do not want to talk to strangers on the phone.
Right.
And I'd be like, Dad, I don't want to call because then I've got to talk to a stranger. And then even in my adulthood, I've had people be like, hey, Nicole, can you call the Con Ed and talk to them about whatever? Because they literally just don't want to talk to a stranger on the phone. Or like we'd be at the airport and he'd be like, can you go check with the front desk to see when we're boarding? And I'm like, it says it right there. And he would go ask the question. But it just, as like a kid, it made me like cool with going up and talking
100%.
and asking questions and asking for what I needed. So anyway, shout out to dads.
Yeah, 100% shout out to dads.
Anyway.
Great dad
Support
story.
system.
Great dad
Yeah.
story.
Love it.
Yeah.
It's a dad
I'm a
podcast
so
now.
Yeah, I like
appreciate
it.
all this.
I like it.
I'm absorbing the tips for
Yeah.
There you
being
go.
a dad. That's great. And on that subject, I mean, we've heard like nice little nuggets from both of your stories about similarities and differences across the generations you both come from. You being, are you millennial or Gen Z?
So I'm
the border?
I'm on the border.
Yeah,
I
what I
turned
thought.
30 this year.
Right.
So I'm technically a millennial.
Yep.
But
Gen X, Julie?
Yes.
Gen X.
I'm not going to say what I turned this year
You don't
in a
have
month,
to.
but actually I'm an age person that says I'm glad to be here. And I've never shown up, no matter how old I get, saying, oh no, I wish I were 30. I wish I were 40 again, you know, because it really does get better with age. Because you kind of go through this, like, I don't want to say I show up not caring, but you mature in ways, and you've experienced things so much that you can, I don't know, push differently than you did before, and process things differently. So anyway,
I think aging is great.
I'll
I'm
be
thrilled.
50 in a year plus.
hey,
We'll
there we
say
go.
it that.
Year,
Yes.
year or plus.
So we're
Year
literally
plus.
our span. You're 30, I'm 40, and you're just about 50.
Yeah.
There you go.
We have 3 decades, which
Love
is
it.
very
Love
interesting.
it. Absolutely love it.
But it's not about me. So I want to talk about Gen Z and millennials first. How are Gen Z and millennials shaping the fintech landscape? We millennials and Gen Z folk have very unique characteristics about us. What's been your generation's impact, Nicole? And what do you think they'll be remembered for the most when history writes about these days? The fintech
I know. I like to think that
innovation.
My book is the history, is a part of that history. And a lot of the founders that I do cover in that space are a portion of them are Gen Z founders. And there's a section in the book, it's called Fintech Feminist, by the way, where I talk about community as your competitive advantage. And I think that's what the Gen Z and millennial experience and those founders in that realm that are very in the early stages right now. You know, most of them, they took an internship or their first job at Goldman, looked around, saw, no diversity, or saw the way that their male counterparts were able to talk about investing in a way that they didn't and didn't understand. And it's like their dads taught them growing up, back to dads, but they didn't teach the girls. And so they turned around and said, you know what? I can be an entrepreneur. I can found this, because these days being an entrepreneur is easier than ever with the power of technology. So they experienced the industry for like a year or two, and I love it. They're like bold enough to just turn around and say, you know what, I'm going to build something else myself.
It's amazing.
And I think that's something that they're going to be really remembered for, is just that level of audacity. Like, they're in their early 20s and not giving an F, whereas like I had to turn 30 to start increasing my ability to not care about what people think of me, where they have it so early. And I think that's because of social media, right? So the incredibly dangerous, but also incredibly powerful and can be used for good social media. And I think seeing the way that these early stage founders in fintech, I'm talking like the Alinias, the Aura finances, they're really focused, I think, on personal finance. They're focused on being able to actually deliver education alongside the application, which I think has been really missing. If you were to look at like Plaid's FinTech Effect report over the last couple of years, time and again, I read about this in my newsletter a lot, but every year it shows like it's like 75% and then 80%. And then, 85% of fintech users are wanting education from their finance apps because the knowledge and the curiosity there is higher than ever before, because for the first time, everyone has all this access to financial information, right? Like, you don't have to get a subscription to the Wall Street Journal or whatever, or work in the industry to learn about it. All of a sudden you're scrolling TikTok and one day someone's like, do you know about interest rates? And you're like, do I? Hey, do you have a lot of debt? And they're like, oh, do I? Like, it's all of a sudden it's in our faces. And I think that's been the biggest change over the last few years. I think the GameStop stock surge was a huge piece of that. I think that, coupled with the loneliness of the pandemic and just people being bored in their houses, having not much to do but play with your phones, that also spurred the influence of like personal finance influencers like Tori Dunlop, of her first 100K, Vivian Tu, Your Rich BFF, just like these incredible kind of social media almost entrepreneurs that have been able to use that platform to grow millions and millions of followers and then share financial information in different ways. So you couple that, then you have the fintech founders. It's just like this, it's like bubbling, this ability to be able to say, you know what, we don't have to care about our finances in the way that the Dave Ramseys of the world told us we need to. Instead, I don't need to listen to Dave. I can listen to Tori, or I can listen to Vivian, or I can listen to a personal finance influencer that resonates with me in my life, because there's so many out there now. But yeah, I think that's going to be like the imprint, is this like influence of social media and education that has spurred a really communal element around how we deal with our finances, talk about our finances, and what products we use with our finances. So
it's great to hear the positive impact that social media can have in this realm, because
I know
the narrative today is very much, as it should be, about negative and detrimental impact, with Jonathan Haidt's recent book and those types of things. We know there's data saying detrimental to many different age groups, particularly younger among us, but knowing that it has that type of power to connect good in people's lives and help women build businesses and grow their brands is great.
Yeah, we've seen social media play a very horrible role in, because there's that good I mentioned, because I'm an optimist, but the there is a lot of the scariness and the bad. And so I do try to help make sure that we're paying attention to and I amplify the leaders in the space that are using the platform for good, because social media is very terrifying. And I think no child should really have access to it. But anyway.
Well, I was going to say, as a mom of a 15-year-old son and an 11-year-old son, I can tell you the terrifying aspects of it. And, you can only restrict it for so long without, getting the, oh, come on, mom. But the oh, come on, mom, I can live with versus some of the horror out there. But but your point is taken. And I think the positive spin on it is heard.
So that's a great background on like how Gen Z and millennials have leveraged technology, and technology has really changed the game. Curious, Julie, reflecting on your generation and other women you collaborated with over those years, especially in the beginning years, what were the biggest things that you had to tackle to get more women represented in the industry? And what's similar and or different from, what's going on now with how they make those connections?
Yeah, I'll actually start with this, the differences, right? Because I was reflecting, I love this question. I gave a talk many, many years ago on the power of connectivity and the power of LinkedIn. I know that sounds kind of like a weird talk, but it was many years ago. And I think it was like on the 10-year anniversary of LinkedIn. Like this is yeah, I'm old, but you laugh, but it's true. And, I believe, and check my facts, but I think LinkedIn launched in 2002, right? I don't think Facebook launched until what, 06, 07, something like that?
About 4. Yeah,
oh, that, okay.
Wow.
Okay, so I didn't engage Facebook until probably 07, right?
Yeah.
So, we didn't have that digital connection, right? We couldn't find each other, right? So when you were the only woman in the room, and then you were, I wouldn't say the only woman in the company, but then you were the one of 5 women in the company, and then one of 10 at the conference. It was pretty hard. You could find the one and, whatever. But it was very hard to get in mass. Okay. And I actually I think at the time, just really, if I reflect back to 20 something Julie, I really didn't know what I was missing at first until I went to my very first women's conference, and I heard about it. It was, the acronym for it at the time was WOW, and it was Women on Wall Street, run by Deutsche Bank. I don't know, Deutsche Bank listeners, if you're listening, I don't know if you still run it. If you do, I may need to belly up there one day. But I'll never forget this conference, because I walked in and there were literally thousands of women. And I was like 28, 29 at the time. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And there were some men in the room, but it was women on Wall Street. And I live in Chicago. I was living in Chicago at the time. This was up in New York. And I'll never forget attending this panel and listening to these 3 women speak. And, and I forget all of their names, but they were asked the question, how do you do it all? And the one woman's answer I really gravitated towards, I think, in life. And she said, well, you can have it all. You just can't have it all at the same time. And it takes prioritization. And, at the time I had no kids, I wasn't married. And she's like, well, sometimes you're going to be a great mom or a great wife. And sometimes you're going to be really a great worker. Another woman's answer was, well, I've put family off. Right. And that was her choice. I think everyone has to come into life with their own choices, right? How are you going to approach your career? And anyway, that stuck with me, but that was kind of my very first foray into kind of a women's circle. I met as many women as I possibly could in that moment. I was open to networking. I was open to mentoring. I was open to learning, like, well, what do you do? What is this tier 2 bank? What does this mean? And so it was very, very eye-opening. And so that was in my late 20s. And I then, like I said, I didn't quite know what I was missing until I saw that. And then I started kind of like really seeking out women in the industry, and kind of making that my mission. And so then when I showed up years later at an exchange, one of the largest exchanges in the world, when a couple women approached me and said, hey, we're 165 at the time year old company. We don't have an employee. We don't have any network programs in the company. But we want to make the first one a women's network. What do you think? And I said, I'm in. And so there are 5 of us that started it. We were on the board of it, and we wrote a charter about it and said, what do we want this to be about? And the first thing was connectivity, right? And, I've had a job doing international sales where I've had the privilege, like I get on a plane, I get to go to the London office, I get to go to the Spain office, I get to go to New York, right? So I see people and meet them and can, see the office culture. But some jobs don't allow that portability and that flexibility for women who are still hungry for that connectivity and the learnings, right, that you can get from that connectivity. And so that was our first mission on the charter, was we need to get the connectivity tissue going with women in the organization. And so there's a lot there. We didn't have that social media in the beginning. We didn't have that connectivity tissue, but then that started to like show its head, and you could easily more connect and, start, creating some of these networks. But I forget the other part of the question that you asked with regards to how do we facilitate help? What was give me the second part of the question again? Hit me.
Over the years, like what were some of the differences between, Nicole was talking about how technology is how women connect with each other to network. What were some of the differences in how you connected with women? Just mentioned group.
Yeah.
That was created.
Well, you started you had to start in person.
Yeah,
we had to start
obviously
in person.
In-person connections were the de facto way.
Yeah. And look, I think that there's no replacement for the human face-to-face connection, right? And so
That's why
part
we're
of
here, right?
part of the
Everybody's
social,
here.
right? I mean, part of the social movement has been a little frustrating, right? Because I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
people do rely on their phones a lot. People do rely on that kind of digital touch point. And I'm old school. I like to meet you in person. I like to have the one-on-one. I like to get to know folks. But I thought part of the question was something about how did you bring women more into the room? And I think that yes, it was through some of these network groups. It was. But also you started, you got to be women supporting women, right? And I realized that I had a position that I was moving around, and I could introduce women to other women that would never have met each other, in those cycles. And then you start role modeling that, and then you start spreading the word on that, and then you get other people to do that. And then, you start creating a dynamic, right? Especially in some of these global organizations. Where there's fuel for it. So I have a lot more to say on the subject, but we'll,
I think that what you did and what you were willing to do at the time is, you did what you did so I could run, right? So like platforms like Fintech as Femme could exist. I make it very, very intentional that Fintech as Femme does not only live online, because we cannot. We have to. It's why I host events, right? It's why I host summits. It's why I come to events like this. I'm hosting a dinner tonight, with a lot of women in the space, and it's that's exactly the point. We have to both come together, and then we have to live online at the same time, because we can't be with each other all the time. But I think that hybrid approach is is where we're heading a bit more. And I want to remind my Gen Z friends of that importance, because I do have a lot of younger readers or people that I engage with who I got to tell them they got to look up from that phone, because that's not the only way you're gonna progress forward, especially in an industry like this where you do have to show up.
And that's a society issue too that we're dealing
yeah.
with, right? I mean, it really is, right? I have to tell my kids to look up all the time. So yeah, that's a great point.
Look up
and then myself, so I don't get hit by a car. Yeah.
Yeah, very, very important.
I know you wanted to talk about this one, so let's touch on, I know something you both believe in, which is the power of storytelling and applying it to this industry to humanize our industry, the women and the leaders within it, to help create that more inclusive narrative and image. So Nicole, share with us, how do you select what stories you tell, for example, in Fintech as Femme, and what impact you hope they'll have through those stories? What's your thinking process?
It can be very challenging because there's so much going on. There's a lot of noise. Luckily, in my background as a B2B reporter, I often say, and I say this even if I'm speaking at a content or newsletter conference, those exist now, where I'll tell other writers that at the end of the day, like, you're not going to break news. I'm never going to do what Reuters does. I'm never going to do what Bloomberg does. That is impossible. I am one human writing a newsletter twice a week.
I have to say, I hear some things first from you, Nicole.
Oh,
so
well, then there you
do
go.
a good job.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
Well,
you're
so
right on top of it.
Thank you, because so what I do instead is I make sure to really have original content. And in order to do that, I actually have to go out and have my own original interviews and have my own, my own summits. Like that, I have fireside chats and panels and presentations. That's all original content coming from Fintech is Femme that you're not going to get anywhere else. So if I'm not going to just keep up with the Joneses, how can I zig where everyone else is zagging, right?
100%.
I need to go completely different. I even thought that when I was first building Fintech is Femme, when I first was under an agency and then I left the agency at the end of last year. So now I'm completely independent as a publication. But the founders of the agency at the time, when they asked me to write a Fintech newsletter, I remember being like, okay, well, at the time it was called What the Fintech. And I was like, I'll just report on Fintech news like I usually do. But I didn't feel like the impact, right? How am I different? How am I different from the other newsletter writers out there that already exist? But once I doubled down on what I really cared about, which was amplifying women's stories in this space so that we could see real change, so that I focused on impact. And that is how the brand accelerated. People are like, how'd you get 50,000 subscribers in a year? And I'm like, I tapped an opportunity, a wide open market that no one else was hitting on. And then I doubled down on it. And I changed the brand's name to Fintech is Femme. So it was very clear who I am, what I stand for. And it became a rallying cry. To the point of, so now I focus on a few core pillars of content: innovation, impact, community. And if it falls in those lines, then it's kind of up for grabs. I don't only cover women's stories. I cover pretty much anyone that is really focused on leveraging a more feminist, if you will, perspective on how we approach business, on how we approach business models. I am more interested in people that want that long-term success, that long-term sustainability. How do we move away from move fast and break shit? I'm sorry if I swear here.
No,
is this an adult podcast or anyway?
It is.
Good. And I want us to think more about how do we still move fast but fix things instead of breaking things. I think we've seen patterns time and again of how we move too fast and break things, and that hurts a lot of people and doesn't make our industry any better. So I've kind of focused on my process is I'll read stories, I'll have original content. I think did I find this valuable for myself? Because what's the beauty of what I do is I am my audience in a way. I'm a founder as well, female founder. I face all the same struggles and hardships and happiness that my audience feels. So they resonate with me a ton.
Yep.
I get the same, what's the ROI on women questions? And I'm like, okay, like, let me show you thousands of pieces of data to show you. So that, I think it's the personal narrative of people in this industry tied to data that backs them up, that creates like a very airtight case for whatever I'm putting forward. So, why we should have more fintech companies that focus on the female customer, or why we should have more Gen Z founders, or why we need to make sure that we're also having more multi-generational founders, because we don't only need to look at young people to solve our problems. I think that one of my moments of success is if I've had a woman message me saying, I know you don't know me, but I'm 50 years old and I decided to leave my job and start a tech company, and all because of your newsletter. And I feel like everything I learned in your newsletter made me feel confident enough to do this. No, I know. And
how amazing.
It was very nice. I screenshot it and we'll put it on my wall. And she was like, I know you don't, I feel like you're with me. Like, you're with me along the ride, giving me what I need. And so that's really the focus. Like, how can I give my audience what they need to actually go and do something? Like, I'm not interested in just sensationalizing news. I'm not interested in how many clicks I can get. I don't even do my brand deals that way, because I don't want to make money based on that. Like, I don't want to make money based off of, well, I got you a bajillion clicks because I threw some sensationalized, copy in a headline.
Yep.
I would rather create money because someone is interested in, the leads I can give them, because that means they get to partner with more women and more female run companies. Or amplify it, or give them the data that they need to succeed. So that's kind of how the process goes. Yeah.
That's great. And Julie, touch on your thoughts on that, and we'll close things out. We're talking about lastly, just the importance of authenticity, which she just touched on, how
Mhm.
important it is to be authentic as marketers, as salespeople, as women in the business, and as men, of course, too. So wrap your final thoughts into the umbrella
Yeah.
there.
Okay. I will try my best.
Yeah.
Okay. So
And take your time.
storytelling, I am Southern, I'm in sales, I'm a woman. I got all the things that allow me a good storytelling moment. No, but seriously, Nicole, listen, as I listen to you, I just met you an hour ago, and just how impressive, how cool what you're doing and
Oh,
bringing
thank
to the
you.
forefront. And I can't tell you, like, I almost teared up when you're like, pave the way and things like that, because that's how I felt about women ahead of me.
Mhm.
Right, working at the exchange that I was at, there was a woman who's still there, the COO of it, and she really believed in me, really supported me throughout it. We've still remained friends after I departed, and kind of got my wings and flew elsewhere. And those things like really matter. But she was a sincere pioneer in the in the industry and in that organization. And it does take people plowing to then get the next plow to come through. So I just really want to commend you on like just how beautiful your story is, and I'm ashamed of myself that I'd not heard of you. Truly, I'll acknowledge
It's
that.
okay. We're good now.
Yeah, we're good now. We're good now, girl. So
This is
so-
just the beginning.
yeah, 100%. Because I can make a lot of really good introductions, I think, to some women that will just be thrilled. So so the storytelling. So I'll tell you, we still are in the traditional sense in this conference where you get people on stage and, you have your moments and things. And that was a really big deal. I remember when I was asked to do my first like women's panel, and I just took it so seriously. I was like, because I went back to my Women on Wall Street thought. I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to be impactful. And then I remember I talked to my mom before I went and did it. And my mom was like, well, just be yourself, and I was like, you're right.
She's right.
She's right. And it's like, because like you just got to be yourself, because if you're not, you're going to just show up wrong. Right. I mean, that's just an oxymoronic statement, but so that's kind of how I've approached now all of it. Right. And as you talk through your newsletter and the channels to these women, I sat here and, really said, well, okay, I'm not doing a newsletter, which is, I'm not equipped to as you are, but I've done that in my management. I feel like I've showed up as a woman in leadership, and how my management style has manifested into one, I am an authentic leader. At least I hope that's what people would say about me. I have pioneered in the Fintech industry for 20 plus years, and I've done it pretty fearlessly. And I'm sure a lot of people in the rooms with me, when we've disagreed, would be like, yep, she's a pain. But I've done that, fact-based and with experience, and sometimes with inexperience and gut at the same time, but believing in yourself, right? But those panels, like I remember, like I said, that first one I showed up, and it was so meaningful, right? Because those were the times, gaps of social media that you could reach many women in the room, and they would be flooded, flooded. And I remember just being so emotional. And then I got asked to do more and more. And then just to touch on something that, you mentioned about COVID, I hear these people that say people were bored, they didn't have anything to do. I was not one of those people. Like I still worked constantly during that. I mean, constantly, right? I had my children on top of me trying to, e-learn and such, and the dogs barking and all the things. But I was like, who was bored during this time? Not me, right? But I'll tell you what the huge gap for me was during that period of time was the engagement that I got at work. Because you don't just drop in international sales because you don't like people, or because you don't like traveling, or because you don't like engagement, right? Like that's all I'm about. And I, at the time when COVID started, I was working for a startup that I had been on the board of for about 3 years. And then I was their chief commercial officer. And I went to my CEO and I said, Dan, I found out through a contact that there's this women's group forming, and I'm really in need of joining it, right? It's a new group that's launching. I don't know much about it. It comes highly recommended from, a network colleague. And I want to know if you'll support me joining it. It was obviously some money to join. And, I said, look, I think it's mentoring, it's some coaching, it's a network. I don't know, but I want to try. And he goes, done. That's easy. Done. And I was like, thank you. And I joined this group, and I know you girls will be listening at some point to this. And it really gave wind to my wings when I was a little down. Right. And we called ourselves the Constellations, or our leader called us the Constellations. And since that group formed in 2020, I've made some of the best friends in my life. And we collaborated on a book together called 500 Lessons to Our Younger Selves, like things that we weren't told. We didn't have that easy mentor. Men at some stages, men didn't know how to talk to us, didn't know how to manage us, didn't know how to mentor us, right? And we came together and collaborated on this book, and I'm so incredibly proud of it. And it really saved me during that time, right? It was the connectivity tissue I needed. We had things we wanted to say. It was storybook, it's like a coffee table book with like really good, thinkings. Yes. Well, I'm going to send you one after this as a great to meet you. So it's coming your way. But, I think it is the power of the story on the stage. It's the power of, how you show up in your newsletter or a book, but it's how you show up day to day with your teams. It's how you show up every day with your clients, with your peers, with your managers, right? And you have to stay true to yourself, be in it for what you love to do, right? And, I do believe there's a time that I'll be starting my own company. I never wanted to do that in fintech. I've always kind of worked within the vectors. My dream is to start something kind of outside of that once I leave this behind, but I'm not ready to leave it behind yet. Don't worry. Don't worry, dear listeners. I'm not going anywhere yet. But I've so enjoyed just working internationally with so many women because the stories are the same, but they're different. And, and I think if you don't get out and tell your stories too, then to your point, women don't know that like they're not alone. Right. And the one little thing, and I'll say to this is because I was thinking like stories, like I remember I had my second child and I went on my maternity leave the whole 12 weeks that they get in the US.
That's a different podcast.
Yeah, it's a totally different podcast. And I love you boys, but you've no idea, right? How working moms, what they give up, how they show up, and for everybody to the point of exhaustion, right? But my point is I came back and I was ready to go back to work. I make a choice. My kids know that I choose career and them. I choose them both. But I came back and I remember I got my bonus. And I was like, cool. I was like, hey, I think the percentage is wrong here. Like something happened to my bonus, right? And my boss at the time said, well, yeah, you were gone. So like I'd only gotten partial pay because I was on my leave, right? So you get your X amount, your Y amount, and you only get this partial pay. And I was like, do what now? And he was like, and it wasn't, I was like, wait, do what? And he's like, yeah, well, you got the percentage based on the salary that you got paid. And I have to tell you, that was the first time, and I'd already had one child. And by the way, I worked at Lehman Brothers when I had my first child, and he was born October of 2008. That's a whole other, you want to hear some stories? I've got them that we don't have enough time here.
Part two.
And I thought, you're kidding me. I don't get my full bonus because I just went and gave life. And I was only gone 12 weeks. Mm-hmm. And, he did fight for me. But it wasn't, I didn't want it to be fought for me. I wanted the policy to change. Right. And so to the point when you said storytelling, it's like, I can tell a great story to customers about our value prop or, the economics of, the world. Right. But you also have to share your stories of like, that wasn't cool. Mm-hmm. And that was like, you Absolutely. Have to be able to share that. And then you have to be able to show up, and say it's not okay. But not everybody is comfortable to say it's not okay. Right. And so we want to give them that strength.
Yeah, no, that's exactly. So that's what authenticity is every time that you authentically stand up for yourself, think about how many doors you're opening for other women to walk through. Right. So that's exactly 100%. What you did. And so that's how you see the next generation come up. I would say when we spend more time being our authentic selves, we get to actually save a lot of time that we typically waste on caring about how we need to retrofit ourselves into the whatever societal structures we are ingrained and embedded into ourselves. So when we can have enough of that self-reflection or, going through whatever you have to go through to kind of get to the other side of that, because that is not our fault that we're told all of these narratives and all these crappy stories about, we're not good enough at this, imposter syndrome, which we all know is fake. This is another story women are told to keep us, down. But when we move beyond that and we realize that there's so many incredible humans and we give people the benefit of the doubt, and there's so many incredible men as well, and just in this world that will support you, and you focus on those people, and then you focus your authenticity there, we then can turn around and instead of telling women to change themselves, we can start what you said, telling systems to start changing. Because there's nothing wrong with us. There's literally nothing wrong with women. You do not need to change. Your mindset is fine. You do not need to do anything. In fact, I would like for you to be yourself. And then I would like for you to turn around and say, you know what? I see what's wrong with that, right? That percentage was off. Why did I not get paid fairly? Because I had a child. That is work. There's no such thing as a not working mom.
They're
the hardest work. Yeah, they got 2 jobs and then and double time. So that's not. Our GDP doesn't even account for unpaid labor. So how much money is left on the table because we're not even accounting for these things?
Well, and I'll tell you, as having 2 of them, I think it's your job, then your momming, and then it's your body.
No, exactly.
So that's 3 different elements that you're trying to fight all at the same time, and people have to show up differently in support of that. So anyway, I'm not not trying to die on the hill on that one per se, but it was it was a while ago. But we need a part 2, Alex.
I know
we're gonna have to
that.
insist on that.
Enact policy changes, right? How about we tell businesses to pay their women fairly? How about we tell businesses that they need to have paid leave policies that are so much better than what we have, especially here in the States, right? Let's start questioning how our systems are structured instead of spending all this time telling women to change. I think that's how we move forward.
Great note to finish up on. And I will schedule that part 2 anytime.
We demand it.
I think your wish is my command.
We shut down the whole
we are
place.
shutting down
Literally
this place,
shut
so
this
it's time
place
to
down.
Say goodbye,
So,
but what a rich
wonderful.
conversation. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
More to come.
Bye.